Gore Vidal is one of this country's preeminent writers. He has written 24 novels as well as several screenplays and a book of essays that won him the National Book Award in 1993. All the while, he's remained a constant voice in the nation's political dialogue. His latest novel is his first in 6 years. It is somewhat of an experiment merging science fiction with historical fact. It is called the Smithsonian Institution, and I am pleased to have this institution join us again. Welcome back, sir.
Very happy to be back.
I want to talk about where the country is before we come to this, but this has all the looks of a Harlequin novel.
Isn't it wonderful? And there's the Smithsonian,
Yes.
and you and I are both basically Washington creatures.
That's right.
And I don't know what they're going to say. There's a 13-year-old protagonist.
Yes.
And all the exhibits come alive at night in 1939, and he is making love to Mrs. Grover Cleveland.
Yes.
And she is 21. So I don't know, and as you know, she can go to prison in Orange County, California, for what is happening on the lawn of the Smithsonian.
All right, more about this in a minute. Tell me what you think of what's happening in Washington today.
I'm with the American people on this one, 80% like Clinton, and a lot of it is reaction to this stuff. The sex lives of anybody in politics or anywhere else is of no importance to their execution of their work. So I'm pretty much on his side. There are many. The reason why we get so much sex, first, it's an easy smear, but we get so much of it because we are not allowed to discuss politics in the United States. If you want to rise in politics, in office, you talk about other things. And I think when he started in, he seemed to recognize that the only thing worth talking about for adults in a society like ours, allegedly, is who collects what money to spend on whom for what. That, in one sentence, is what politics is. Taxation and expenditures. We can't talk about it, because then you have to get into the overruns at General Electric. You have to get into the defense budget, which procurement is just as high as ever. If you can't talk about all these things, what have you got left but the sex lives of the candidates? That's part of our problem. Now, is he himself guilty of an active sexual life? I suppose he probably is. Am I interested? No. And are most of the American people, as long as he's minding the store? I don't think they are either. One thing funny on television now, you get, there'll be 3 or 4 faces, you know, and little boxes coming on. 3 will be
lawyers.
Again, well, 4 will be lawyers, but they'll be against Clinton, 3 of them. 1 will be for Clinton, and the one for Clinton has a very pointed head and, you know, strange-looking mad comic ears and plainly a loon.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that odd? It's always loaded against Clinton. This is networks, this is television all over. And it makes me think there's a conspiracy.
You have looked at other presidents, Abraham Lincoln, for example, and others that you have watched and or written about. Where will this put the president? What impact will it have in terms of his place in history? All of this contemporary conversation about his sexual behavior.
Well, I think he's already been erased, because when they won the battle over health care, which is the only thing that he proposed, that would have been good for the people at large, and it was radical. It was as radical as I remember the debate in 1935 over Social Security, which Franklin Roosevelt put through, and the Republicans were saying, you'll lose your name. You'll only have to wear a number. You know, we've heard all this before. His one shot was that thing. When he failed at it, he has been running so scared, and then they come up with the private stuff about him. He is ineffective, but I would say that no president since Harry Truman has been anything other than what I call a twilight president. This is a twilight period.
For America?
For America. There's nothing innovative done. Yes, we have all the weapons. And we do an occasional light show for Ted Turner in the Gulf. But
for the benefit of CNN.
For the benefit of CNN. At least we're still commercial.
Bump up their ratings, is that the point?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And to make Peter Arnett a star.
You do see conspiracy everywhere.
Oh, yes, I do. And what is interesting is that people who conspire, I mean, what is a political party but a conspiracy to get power, have made anyone who says, uh-oh, they're getting together, this group, ITT, which owns Hartford Life, et cetera, and you check it out. Oh, he believes in conspiracy. He thinks that Oswald had accomplices. He probably has seen a flying saucer. You know, anyone who says it, but what else would you do to get people off the track? There are conspiracies every day. What is a lobbyist in Washington? You know them. I know them. There's 70,000 lawyers lobbying. And the Congress is nothing but other lawyers hired by corporations to pretend to represent states.
Changing to the world of letters, turning from politics to the world of letters, you believe, for example, that television has had the impact of hiding a lot of very good writers in America and in the world who are not having an opportunity to find a publisher and having an opportunity to be read because television is eliminating the incentive to read.
I think that's part of it. I think a lot of it, though, is the educational system, which isn't very good for the public at large. And that you know, there's a big change, and there's nothing to be done about it. We're changing over from the written word to audiovisual. What do kids play with now? They don't have books that they read. It's video games. I mean, they are plugged into that. And if you want somebody to fix your television, call in a 9-year-old. You know, I can't do it. You can't do it. But they know how to do these things.
Well, but that's good.
But it's new. It's different, and I don't.
But it's good because it offers them an access to a world of information. And access to a world that...
Nobody's knocking it. We're talking about literature, though, and what has happened to the traditional culture, and that is getting thinner and thinner. And it is fading away. It'll always have a small audience. I worry a bit that, you know, the movies are the most popular thing now. Everywhere you go, I've never heard anybody mention a novel to me in 20 years. They'll always say, oh, have you seen Good Will Hunting or something like that? Well, the movies are a wonderful art form, but it's the only form, narrative form, in which there is no mind at work. It's emotional,
right,
and it draws you in, it dazzles you with pictures.
You sit there and absorb rather than...
You're passive.
Right.
Reading a book, you look at the line, and the writer is coming out of the page at you with what he's written, and your eye is following it. And it's the two of you in a kind of locked together. This can't happen with television, can't happen with movies. That's the downside, so let's hope it'll be more pluralistic.
Yeah. But in a way, the fact that more and more, especially young people, are using computers and are gaining access to the internet, that's a very active thing to do, to seek out information that way.
No,
it's not a responsive, sort of passive watching of television. You have to engage it. You have to find your way through it. It doesn't just come at you.
I think it helps to have a bit of the written culture so that you know what you're looking for. I mean, you have access to great libraries and museums now on the internet, but if you haven't heard of them and you don't know where to get to them.
Where do you come down, I've never asked you this, on the great battle about what is a politically correct world and the whole notion of Eurocentric ideas of Western civilization?
Well, I answered that question recently in San Francisco. A law is in place, I don't know whether it's just for the city or the whole state, that as 40% of all students are people of color, and they insist that 40% of all the books taught, available in libraries and so on, be by people of color. So you immediately get, well, where's Shakespeare and so on. And then the more I thought about it, I came out in favor of 40%. I mean, I hate people being quotas schematic like that, but in theory, yeah. And I said, and this caused consternation, I said some of the greatest literature ever written is Chinese and Japanese and Indian. And these are definitely people of color, according to the law. To teach the Lady Murasaki, one of the greatest novelists that ever lived from the 7th century, I think A.D., the Heian period, and Sei Shonagon, and some of the Chinese poetry is magnificent stuff. Now, this would require great intelligence on the part of educators, but translate these books. Then I think that the kids, you know, the white race is, I think, less than 20% of the world's population, and we're very unpopular, deservedly for what we've done to the other races. I would want to get to know, particularly Chinese, Japanese, Indian, because that's almost 2/3 of the population.
But that's the responsibility of the educators, as you say.
Yeah, so you have to educate the educators.
Right. But the notion back to America, within our cultural influence is as powerful as our political and military influence.
Well, our political is not powerful.
It may not be the culture that we want to necessarily be proud of. It is
Oh, no.
movies, it is fashion primarily.
Our victory has been of a cultural nature. Some of it pretty minus, but it is our television programs, our movies, and so on.
And it is also our ideals and our values as expressed by those that you admire.
As far as I can tell, the only ideals expressed on television or in film are trying to get as much money as you can.
Yeah, but I mean, at the times of political change in Eastern Europe, I mean, they were talking about the American Revolution and the ideals of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence.
Yes, and so did Ho Chi Minh when he started.
Of course he did, exactly right.
But
that says something, doesn't it? Don't we get...
It says something about our past. I'm talking about our present. Yes, in the 18th century, we were indeed the city on the hill, and we were a great experiment that we had actually thought that life, liberty, and then the joker in the deck that Jefferson gave us, and the pursuit of happiness,
right,
was the proper goal of any society. Nobody had ever thought of that one before. And Jefferson was dedicated to it, and many of the founders were. It turned out that we had many, many problems, and the main one was exchanging the republic for an empire as of 1950, thank you, Harry Truman, and the National Security Act. With that, we became a world empire,
did we
militarized.
Have to assume that role? I mean, did we
No,
have?
we did
could we not have? Could we have avoided the assumption that it's a little bit like even today, with respect to what happened in the Gulf War, and the Gulf War, not the most recent Desert Storm, not the most recent preparations for doing something.
Well, no.
Would you have opposed the United States if, in fact, Saddam had not made the agreement that he made with the Secretary General? Would you have been opposed to using American military force to go in there?
Of course. I also
Opposed the Gulf War?
I made a big speech in L.A. on Gulf War I, Bush's war, saying that this was just opening up such a box, Pandora's box of poison. We should stay out of these wars. We're not very good at them. Vietnam should have taught us something. We have so much to do repairing our own country. I mean, it's just so shocking to go through the cities, the centers of the cities, and see what's happened.
And the most corrupting influence is what? Corporate
Politics,
power?
corporate power, and its handmaiden, the politicians, who are part of this. But what's interesting is the politicians are the least powerful now.
But you haven't been optimistic about the country for a long time.
I've had good reason not to be. I was optimistic from 1945 to 1950. I got out of the Army in 46. I'd been in the Pacific. My first book came out. 1950, I was working desperately in television to make a living. And suddenly there was Joe McCarthy, the Korean War. Well, there has been nothing but really a succession of bad news from then till now. Younger people have lived with it all their lives, don't recognize it. When you think of what hope and excitement there was from 45 to 50, the first time we hadn't been at war.
Well, what about the excitement of 1960 when you're...
That was negative excitement, and that was really people who didn't want to go and fight in the war.
No, not in 60 in terms of the leadership. They'd fought in World War II, and this was Jack Kennedy and his colleagues.
Well, I'm thinking later in the 60s.
No, I'm talking about 1960 when Jack Kennedy and Camelot came in and...
Well, I knew too much about that to... I liked it.
Yeah, but what did you know what was it that made it unattractive to you?
Oh, well,
no, I mean, forget whatever the private behavior of the president was.
No, that wouldn't make any difference to me. But I didn't understand. I was beginning to suspect that there was nothing to it, that it was all a kind of facade. Jack wanted to be president because it was number one. And driven by that father, who I did know was really bad news. And I was never much, I mean, after the Bay of Pigs, my God, what is he going to do next? I saw that he was headed for war, and we used to talk about it. Where would Lincoln be without the Civil War? I said, you want a Civil War? No, I don't want a Civil War.
You didn't have that conversation with him, did you?
Sure I did. I also got...
and so a recognition of him that without war, he might not go down as a great president.
Well, no, he wasn't talking about himself. We were talking about what made presidents great.
I see. So the idea of greatness.
And he had talked to David Herbert Donald, whom you've had on this program.
Sure. Wonderful.
Wrote a good book about Lincoln. And he had said to Donald, well, it's mostly situation, isn't it? And Donald said, yes. If you have a civil war, you're going to be a great president, plus or minus, but you are there. Whereas if you live in good times, no.
But look
Jack
at
was romantic. Montaigne, the first essayist.
philosopher, yes.
Well, Montaigne was wonderful. He was elected twice mayor of Bordeaux. And he said, this has been the 17th century, he said, I've been criticized because nothing happened while I was mayor of Bordeaux. I think that was a triumph.
Yes, I do too. What would you do different in the life that you have lived?
I can't think of anything. I have done pretty much what I wanted to do. I'll give a little advice out there for those who worry about their place in the world. Always remember that it is of no consequence to you what other people think of you. What matters is what you think of them. That is how you live your life.
Someone said that to me recently. They said, the older I get, the more I care less about what they think and more about what I think of them.
Yes, and I'm a hanging judge.
Do you, you wouldn't do anything different. Do you regret going for something, reaching for something, attempting something, risking something that you didn't?
Well, I wanted to be a politician, and I was brought up by my grandfather to be one.
You ran for Congress.
Yeah, and then 2 years later I lost, but doubled the vote. 2 years later, the seat was mine, and I turned it down to go back to being a novelist.
And that was what, 60? By then it was 60 or
I
62?
ran in 60, and by 64,
right,
4 years later, the seat was mine. I decided I didn't want to go to the House.
Do you regret that at all?
Oh no, because if you want to, I want to be effective. We now know, we didn't know so clearly then, but we now know that the one thing you must not address yourself to is politics if you want to rise in office.
So if, in fact, we now come to the time to measure your effectiveness, how do you present the case of how you've been effective?
Why, must allow me another hour.
Come on, give me. What's the single most important contribution you have made?
Well, I think I have pointed out the nature of the empire, which for many, many people who read anything from The Nation, to Vanity Fair, to my long time on television. Defining the prospects of what's really going on in the country, and do we want an empire, do we want a republic?
Do you think, though, if you, in a sense, have been a voice in the wilderness about empire, against empire, and for the republic, for other aspects of a life that you admire, that you failed in a sense that your side lost?
Oh, nothing is lost. Things evolve. First law of physics, there is no action without reaction.
Yes, I know.
You set things in motion. I now have 6 books sitting in the modern library that presumably will be read until replaced by video games, in which case I expect them to be made into video games.
And if, Mr. Vidal, I can only read one today, what are you going to say is the first one for them to read?
Oh, I would probably say Creation.
Really?
In which I go back to the 5th century BC, and you learn about Confucius, the Buddha, Zoroaster, and Socrates. And in the coming Asian world, we'll all need to know about it, and it was one of the earliest books on the subject.
Is this, the Smithsonian Institution, a novel up to that standard?
This is really fun, and it's actually, it bends the mind, or tries to, toward quantum physics. And the kid in it, T for time, Einstein figures out that he is the next step in human evolution, that his brain is not constructed like others.
Right.
He can see theorems, whereas the rest of the people have to write them out. And he is the next step. So it ends on a very optimistic note that we can change and will.
Gore Vidal, the Smithsonian Institution, a novel. Thank you for coming, as always. We'll be back. Stay with us.